שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו בזמן הזה. This day has long been coming. Shavua Tov, welcome. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the wife of the Israeli Consul General, who is here. Out of her sick bed to be with us today, Samantha, thank you. And I would also like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Rabbi David Walkenfeld for giving us this facility on this very special occasion. Thank you. When I looked ahead to this coming Shabbat's Parashat Haftarah, Parashat V'Shalach, and Shoftim 45, to give some frame of reference to this event, the challenge became one of brevity. Miriam, Dvorah, and Yael do not lend themselves to a mere 3 to 4 minutes, in which my sole function is to welcome you, say a few words about our choice of topic, and introduce our remarkable inaugural speaker, Rabbi Yaffa Epstein. At first blush, Miriam Nevi'ah, Miriam the prophetess, to whom just 17 verses of the Tanakh are dedicated, may be said to play a bit part. Or so it would seem until we turn to Micha, chapter 6, verse 4, the final scriptural reference to her. כי העליתיך מארץ מצרים ומבית עבדים פדיתיך ואשלח לפניך את משה, אהרון ומרים. For I brought thee out of the land of Egypt and redeemed thee out of the house of bondage, and I sent before thee Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Here Miriam is not merely named with her brothers, but is depicted as their equal. The text tells us that together, all 3 siblings led Bnei Israel out of Egypt. In film industry terms, one might say that she, like many women in the Tanakh, exemplifies Stanislavski's observation that there are no small parts, only small actors. And Miriam was certainly no small actor. Broadly speaking, the titular trailblazers of today's program, like their biblical predecessors, are not the proverbial neshot chayil, women of valor, paragons of domesticity. Rather, they are, in rabbinic terms, nashim chashuvot, women of consequence, of stature and scholarship. And seen through that prism, today's program is also about legacies. JOFA's video tribute to my aunt, Belda Lindenbaum, alea Sholom, aptly begins with a clip of her younger self, citing a phrase from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes 4:12. V'achut hameshulash lo bimhera yinatek. And the 3-stranded cord will not readily be broken. For Belda, who perceived herself as a link in the chain of being, the significance of this verse was twofold. Namely, the sense that she did not wish to break the chain, together with the great sense of pride she felt in being part of it, and of this, our tradition. So too are we, links in the chain, embodiments of the past, present, and future, heirs, custodians, and grantors of our legacy, of the 3-stranded cord, which brings me back to today's program. We need only look to the trailblazing founders and builders of organizations like JOFA for the essence of the Isha Hashuva, one of whom we are privileged to have with us this morning. Rabbi Yaffa Epstein serves as the Director of Education North America for the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. She received rabbinic ordination from Yeshivat Maharat and holds a law degree from Bar-Ilan University. She studied at the Pardes Kollel, the Advanced Talmud Institute at Matan, and the Talmud Department of Hebrew University. Yaffa has been a teacher of Talmud, Jewish law, and liturgy at Pardes for over a decade, and has served as the director of the Beit Midrash at the Dorot Fellowship in Israel. She has taught Talmud and Jewish law at Yeshivat Maharat, the Drisha Institute, the Wenzner Heritage Program New Member Institute, the Kayam Farm Kollel, and Yam Judea. Yaffa has lectured at Limud events around the world, has written curriculum for the Global Day of Jewish Learning, and has created innovative educational programming for Hillel, the Foundation for Jewish Campus Life. And how lucky are we to have her with us today. So without further ado, Yaffa, I had
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much, Timna, for that wonderful introduction and for this amazing event and for having me. It's a huge honor to be here. Of course, to Rabbi Wackerfeld for hosting this event and everyone who has put so much work and effort into making this happen. I'm incredibly grateful to be here and extremely honored to be with you all this morning for this important event. The topic today is Back to the Future, Trailblazing Women of the Talmud and Beyond. And we're going to look at 3 portraits of women in the Talmud and try and understand a little bit about the rabbinic perspective. I named them the activist, the supporter, and the interpreter. And I think we're going to look at these women and try and understand what does the Talmud tell us about women? And what do we do with it today? You know, many times I speak to people and they say, orthodoxy and feminism, those are by definition contradictory terms. And there is something in that, and I think it's an important question for us to ask, but I also think that there's a place where they actually meet. And what I'd like us to look at today is sort of that question. Where do they meet? And is it a new question? Is the question of women in society a new conversation? Or is it something that we've been discussing for actually generations? And how do we, as Jews, understand that? And how do we, as men, understand it? How do we, as women, understand that? What exactly do we understand about the question and the issue of women and women's place in society and also in Judaism specifically, okay? What we're actually going to do is we're going to start with a piece of text that is not Talmudic, but is in fact, I'm going to actually hand these out if we can. Yeah, sure. That one, sorry. That one. Okay, we might need to share one for 2. Thank God.
Rabbi, wave down here.
Don't look, because you're getting bored. Don't look. Well, I don't have to get these out right away. Good. But I won't have your attention. We're actually going to turn to the second page, if you will. And we're going to look at, when we talk about trailblazing women, Judith Plaskow is seen to be the first Jewish feminist theologian. The first person to really ask the question of women from a theological perspective. That's what she is. That is the claim about Judith Plaskow. That she's the first Jewish feminist theologian, and she wrote an incredibly important book called Standing Again at Sinai, which discusses the fact that women seem to be rejected or not present at the most fundamental, foundational moment of Jewish history, which is the covenant with God at Sinai, right? God's revelation at Sinai. Women seem to be rejected, sidelined, etc. And she wrote an entire book about this issue. And this is the beginning of the book. I think it's really worth looking at. And then I want us to think very critically about what she's saying and sort of use that as the lens to look at the Talmudic pieces. Okay, so I'm just going to start right at the controversy. We're just going to start right with controversy and see what we think about whether the Talmud would agree with Judith Plaskow or disagree. Okay, so it's sort of like trying to understand her perspective and the Talmud's perspective and see how they work together. Okay, so everybody with me? I'm on the second page, Judith Plaskow, Standing Again at Sinai. Okay, everybody with me? Yes? Yes. Okay, great. Entry into the covenant at Sinai is the root experience of Judaism, the central event that established the Jewish people. Given the importance of this event, there can be no verse in the Torah more disturbing to the feminist than Moses' warning to his people in Exodus 19:15. Be ready for the third day, do not go near a woman. Okay? Right? Very important pasuk, which she claims is the moment of rejection of women. Right? Because if I'm part of the conversation, then I wouldn't say don't go near a woman. The fact that I say do not go near a woman means I'm only speaking to the men. Okay, good. That's the critique, my friends. And it's a critique, right? It's there, okay? So for here, right, at the very moment that the Jewish people stand at Mount Sinai, ready to enter into the covenant, not now the covenant with the individual patriarchs, but presumably with the people as a whole, Moses addresses the community only as men. Okay, and that's her critique. It's worth continuing on to keep reading, but I want to skip down for a minute and hear this, because this is actually, I think, quite beautiful. Look at this, my friends. It is not only us who ask these questions. You with me? Okay, so that's her main critique, and it's important and worth continuing on, but we're just going to skip a little bit. It is not only us who ask these questions. The rabbis, too, seem to have been disturbed at the implication of women's absence from Sinai and found a way to read women's presence into the text. You with me, my friends? That's an incredibly important sentence. It is not only us who ask these questions, which I think is fascinating, right? This is a woman who is writing a feminist critique of the most foundational moment, okay, of Jewish history, right? And the fact that we are missing women, presumably, when Moses addresses the congregation. And she says here that who else is disturbed by the absence of women? That's right. Right? Chazal, the rabbis, are very disturbed by this, and they find a way to interpret the psukim, to interpret the verses in order to include women into the conversation. How do they do this? Right? The rabbis too seem to be disturbed at the implication of women's absence. Okay? As Rashi understood Exodus 19:3, thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and it's not really only Rashi, but right, it's in fact the rabbis, right? Refers to the women, and the children of Israel refers to the men. The Talmud interprets Exodus 19:15 to mean that women can purify themselves on the third day after there's no longer any chance of having, right, a certain discharge, okay? So in other words, what she's saying here, what Judith Plasko is saying to us is that the rabbinic project was as disturbed by the absence of women in the biblical text as perhaps we are today. Right, or she at least is, right? So that I think is really fascinating. And then she says, listen to this line, my friends, because this I think is key, and it's going to be very interesting for us to look at. Apparently, women's absence was unthinkable to the rabbis, and this despite the fact that in their own work, they continually reenact that absence. Just let that sit there for a second. I know, we're not starting easy this morning, right? But I think there's something really fascinating and interesting about this, right? The rabbis are disturbed, according to Plasko's read, the rabbis are disturbed by the absence of women from the covenantal moments, and yet in their own work, she critiques them further and says, in their own work, there's a continual reenactment of that absence, which is very interesting and maybe true. Maybe not. So what our project is today, my friends, if you choose to accept it, is to ask this question. Is it true that the rabbis simultaneously insert women and also absence them? Insert and absence. Insert. That is the dance that we're going to look at today, and we're specifically going to ask ourselves, right, where do we see the women in the Talmud inserting women into the text, and why? And where do we see their absence? Right? And sort of what is the dance that we're going to see? And then what does it teach me today? Is the dance over? Have we overcome this? Have we moved past it? Are we still in this question? That's sort of that's what we're going to get to hopefully by the end of our time together. Okay, comments, questions, critiques, dislikes? Anybody want to add anything or ask anything? Please feel free. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can you just tell me your name?
My name is Rick Hernandez. I'm Bonnie's husband. Okay.
Hi.
So this kind of reminds me a little bit. I don't remember which portion this is in, but there's one where I think there's these three daughters, and their father dies, and there's a question about their inheritance. And this was such a radical idea that women could inherit property.
Sure.
That Moses didn't know the answer.
Yeah.
He had to ask God.
Yes, he did. Right. Absolutely.
So this isn't a new idea that women are somehow left out of things.
Absolutely. Not new. right? I agree with that. Absolutely right. No, I think it's a very, very nice point because making to us, right, that there are several times, both in the Bible, right, and in the Talmud, where women, there seems to be a repeated conversation where even the question isn't asked, and then when the question is finally asked, Moses doesn't know what to do. He has to go consult with God, right? Which is a really fascinating, in and of itself, worth hours and hours talking about. What does it mean that Moses doesn't know, and why doesn't God tell him originally? Why does he tell him only afterwards? That the women need to come, that they have to ask, right? Really excellent, excellent point. But it's not the first time, right? Because saying it's not a new story, right? Excellent, yes.
But the fact that God says they inherit it validates the inclusion.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
We need.
Right. Right. Well, it's an interesting question, right? Validates the inclusion, specifically about this one issue of inheritance. If there are no sons, no sons, there are no sons, then, so it's not such a simple thing that we just included
It's
women.
not just sons, it's sons, brothers from the whole business, if there are those men.
Well, specifically just sons in this particular case, even if he has brothers, his daughters inherit. But it's an interesting question about it still stays in the family, right? We keep it in the family, in the nachala, and the inheritance, right, in that specific tribe. But it's a very interesting point, right? That we include, and then again, up to a certain point, right? And that I think is this question of this dance, this tension between where we include and where we continue to exclude and why and how that plays out. Okay, great. Other comments? Yes. I don't know your name.
Eliana.
Eliana.
So I think just the fact that we have to consider inclusion,
Yes.
we're setting up this question, like you said at the end, we're going to question whether or not we've actually overcome this dance, if
Yeah.
we're still dancing. But the only way to overcome it is if we no longer have to think about being inclusion.
I think we continue to ask the question, right?
Right, so at some point, like, when we review Talmud and other sources, are we going to look at the absence as a lack of awareness that women had to be part of the discussion, and therefore inserting women into the discussion is
Yeah.
showing
Great.
that they were aware of that?
Great.
Or are we assuming that the lack of discussion means that we're included?
Great. This is a great question. It's a great question and a great point. In other words, the fact that we don't talk about women for, let's say, 20 pages of the Talmud, does that mean they weren't there? Or does it just mean that, like, of course, we're not part of the community? I wish that the answer was, of course, it's part of the community. I'm a little, to be honest, a little doubtful. But what I see, what you're saying, Eliana, is that there's a potential for us to get there, right? That eventually we're going to get to a point where we're reading the text and, right, we're gender blind in a way, right? That we have to continually ask the question, right, which also is important. Very, very important point. We have to keep saying, are they included or are they not, right, is part of the conversation that perpetuates the otherness, right, which I think is very, very important. Okay, so we have 3 more hands, and then we're going to get to the text. Kayla.
So I just wanted to add on to that idea, something interesting that I remember hearing Rabba Halberg say one time was that we only talk about this concept of women being exempt from things if they're supposed to be included in the first place. No one's exempt from something unless the idea of exemption only comes out of inclusion in the first place. The idea that these people are part of something and that they necessarily are exempted.
Right, which is different than what Plaskow would say, which is that the fact that I say don't go near these people means I wasn't talking to those people, so it's the opposite actually reading that, right? Yaffa, very, very nice. Yeah.
We should. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Just one other point, to take it back even a step further, is understanding that women were reading this text also, and that they were accepting it within the text, and then we kind of, it's almost like throwing back at them, like, how come you didn't say anything, but without the understanding that they didn't read it with a question mark. That's Chippa Freimer-Kensky's, that's her big thing. In other words, okay, so the women were included. It doesn't mean that when the women read it, originally, that they felt themselves excluded.
Right.
It's from a historical lens. So
Right. It's a very interesting question, right? Absolutely, it's a very interesting question, right? How do we read the text? Do we read ourselves into the text or out of the text? It's a really interesting point. In fact, yes, just tell me your name again, I'm sorry.
Karen, my name is Karen. So as a performer, one of the things that I struggle with is the idea of kol isha. And when we're reading this, the one thing that comes out for me is our exclusion, or however you want to call it, is also very connected to intimate, physical, sexual things. And so that in and of itself, that the onus is put on the activity of the woman as opposed to the control and nature of the man.
It's a very interesting point, the issue of tzniut, right, of exposure, of sexuality, really interesting. I actually specifically chose 3 stories where we're not actually talking about women as bearers of sexuality necessarily, but in a different role completely. And I think it's going to be interesting, I hope it will be interesting for us to look at when we don't talk about women only in the guise of, right, sexuality, dress, right, tzniut, all those questions, but actually we think about them as different kinds of actors. Here, I think it's going to be very interesting. So that's a great point, right? What do we do to women when we talk specifically about that issue and put the onus on women? Very, very important. Yes, you wanted to make
Just a quick comment in regards to exclusion and inclusion. When they talk about eating the sacrifices, in one spot it specifically says your daughters and the women are included, and very shortly somewhere around there it's just your sons. And it's just, so how do you say, well, oh, I'm included here and that here?
Right. It's a great question. What are the areas where inclusion is obvious, and what are the areas where, right, it's actually not, right? Yes?
May I make a suggestion? I keep here. I have to leave in an hour, and you haven't really started yet.
Okay, good. So that's a great segue. We're actually going to not hear me right now, but we're actually going to turn to each other. We're going to do a little bit of chavritza. We're going to look at the text now. You guys are going to have a chance to actually look at the sources inside, and we're going to look at, in the interest of time, we will look together at source number 1. Okay, we'll do a little bit of chavritza on source number 1, and then we'll come back together and continue discussing this. Okay, so turn to the person next to you. We're going to do a little bit. 5 to 7 minutes of chavritza. Page 1, source number 1. Okay.
One's above request Rabbi, and the one's below request Rabbi. May it be your will. And the one who's on here, paid right now, what's below that, or the one's above. However, when she's writing out often, he didn't have to be added and paid to take out his village. One is above, yes, may it be your will. One is below. As the rabbi says, the prayer verse, to the ground. They stopped praying and prayed. God said the rabbis are investigating. We went and finding the rabbi said, he tore his clothes and turned into your back. He turned into your He said, you do get your eyes baptism. God said the rabbis
Ketubot, and tractate Ketubot is the tractate that deals with the marriage contract, right, the Ketubah. And in particular, it's always important when you're looking at a rabbinic story to understand both its legal context and its historical context. So our time period here is the death of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, right, who was the compiler of the Mishnah, right? And we're talking probably around the year 220, something like that, CE, okay? He lives in the land of Israel. And the legal and literary context here is that we're discussing the issue of how you take care of your stepmother post your father's death. What are your obligations? And this is Rebbe who is admonishing his son. He's saying to his son, listen, when I pass away, please take care of your stepmother, okay? And that's the context here, and it's a series of stories of the day that Rebbe died, on the day that Yehuda Hanassi died. In this context, we're told, Hahu Yoma Denachnavshe de Rebbe, on the day that Rebbe dies, Gazru Banan Ta'amita. The rabbis declare a fast, and and they pray for mercy. They are praying to God, and they're saying, right? And they say this, my friends. Right? A person who says that Rebbe has died will be stabbed with a sword. Meaning what? What does that mean?
Don't say it.
Don't say it. Absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Right? Meaning even if it's true. Even if it happens, we will not acknowledge it. That's right. We will not acknowledge that this has happened, okay? Which is fascinating in and of itself. There's an awareness now. On top of that, my friends, how does the story start? How does the story start?
We know he does.
Exactly, right? How we with the Nachnafshi the Rebbe, right? That he actually passes away. So like the story itself begins by telling me, right, on the day that Rebbe dies, it was told that anybody who says that Rebbe dies, right, will be stabbed with a sword. Okay, meaning we as a community refuse to admit the reality of Rebbe's death. Okay? Who suddenly pops up into the conversation? The Rebbe, right? Rebbe's handmaiden goes up to the roof and says or prays, right? The ones above request Rebbe, and the ones below request Rebbe. May it be your will, God, right? King Yiratzon, that the ones below may overpower the ones above. Okay? Who is she referring? Who are the ones above, my friends? The angels, right? Exactly. The angels, right? The angels are asking for Rebbe, and the students or the people, Jewish people, are asking for Rebbe. May it be your will, God, that the ones below win. I understand we are in an epic battle over Rebbe. May it be your will, God, that in fact the ones below win. I just want to talk about this for 1 second. Where is she?
On the roof.
Why? Why is she on the roof?
Is she alone?
She's doing well. I think that's absolutely right. She's doing laundry. Very good. Okay, effect. Right? Meaning, no, but what does that mean? What does that mean, though? Not necessarily laundry. What does that mean?
She's not part of
Yaffa. She is absent from the rest of the community, probably of his students or of men who are doing what? Praying right near him, down below. Where is she again? They're down below, right? Where is she?
On the roof.
Yeah, well, where? Show me with your hands, physically. All right, exactly. Very excellent. Right, so they're down here. She's over here. Where are the angels?
Higher still.
Exactly, right? No, I think it's actually quite significant because what does that tell me, right? The fact that she had to go up to the roof to have this prayer, and she's able to acknowledge that there are the ones above, the angels, and the ones below. She is somewhere between. Right? She's somewhere in between these two groups of people. So in a way, it's interesting here because we're talking about absence and presence. On the one hand, she's outside of the group of prayers, but on the other hand, she is closer to the angels. Yeah, right? Isn't that interesting here? Right? So she's physically located closer to the ones above, or at least in between, and she can see both sides, right, of the argument, if you will. And she said, okay, you know which side I'm on? I'm with the side of the ones down here on earth. Except that then what happens next, right? However, when she saw, and I think it's actually quite important here, this word, kevan chazai, right? When she sees, she's capable of seeing something here. Kama Kamazine de ayel ben hakisei. How many times he had to go to the bathroom, right? And the rabbis here understand that there's some sort of stomach disease, which is what he's dying from, which seems to be something that the Talmidei Chachamim die from, right? In their world, right? Right, dysentery, right? So it's interesting, that's in and of itself a fascinating conversation of what people die from, and et cetera, but not for right now. But what's interesting here is that she is able to see, right? And what's paining him? She's able to see his pain, and what's paining him?
He has to take off his tefillin.
Yes, Yaffa. He has to put his tefillin back on and take his tefillin off, put his tefillin on, right? Which in and of itself is fascinating because the Tosfot here, important French commentary on the Talmud comments that halachically actually it's not true. He was actually patur he was actually exempted from having to do that. So it's interesting to notice that in this particular piece of the story, right, she sees that he is actually he's strict with himself, that's what I answered, right? Rabbi goes above the call of duty to continue wearing his tefillin, even though he does not have to because it's paining him, even though he's patur, even though he's exempted from it, he goes above and beyond the call of duty, and she can see that. She can see that this is causing him great pain, and therefore, what does she do? She changes her prayer, that's right. She changes her prayer, right? And what does she say instead? Let the ones above, right, win, overcome the ones below, right? But does her prayer work?
No.
Isn't that interesting, my friends? I want to hear what you have to say about that. Her prayer doesn't work because her prayer versus the prayers of the rabbis, right? They did not stop praying. They would not stop praying, right? And her prayer versus their prayer does not actually win, right? So I want to hear what you guys have to say about that. Yeah.
I'm a little confused. I assume that the prayer from below is let him live, and the prayer from the angels is given to us.
Right.
Well, so they didn't, he died.
Eventually they win, but in the meantime, right, she is praying, and they continue to pray. The text says to me, right? Let's look inside for a second, right? The text says to me, right? As the rabbis incessantly continue their prayers for mercy, meaning they're keeping him alive, right? His life support was the prayers of the rabbis. Only when she does this, she picked up a jar and threw it down, right, from the roof to the ground, they stop praying, and that's when he dies. Right? So only at the moment when they stop their prayers, well, her prayer of may they overcome the ones below actually doesn't work. Her prayer doesn't work. What does work?
Action.
Her action, that's right. Her prayer doesn't work, but her act of stopping their prayer, right, that is in fact which is fascinating in itself. What does that mean? That her prayer doesn't work, but her action stops their prayer, and that actually works, right? Is I think very, very fascinating. Yes, just remind me your name.
Mo. Does her
yeah.
prayer not work, or does her prayer lead her to action?
Effect. Good. Her prayer lead. I like that. It's a very nice point. What does it mean that prayer works or doesn't work? Right. It's problematic. It's my phraseology that was problematic. But it's a great point, right? Her prayer allows her to understand, or her seeing allows her to understand, allows her to see what's next, what needs to happen, and then she therefore comes to take action, right? But what I'm saying, if it's her saying, maybe the ones above overcome the ones below, that sentence, versus them continuing to ask for mercy, right? At this point, they're even, and she does not, right? Their prayer seems to keep him alive. Only when she is able to stop their prayer does his soul depart, right? So that's what I meant by it doesn't work, meaning her one sentence versus their continuous acts asking for mercy doesn't cause Rebbe to die until they stop praying completely. Yeah, Vicki, go ahead.
So it seems that her prayer is meaningless. Whether she's with them or whether she's against them, it doesn't make any difference, change anything.
Yeah, I think that there's something I know we don't like that.
I don't like it either, but that's what it sounds like.
But there's something important here, right? In other words, her prayer at least is other. Right? In some way, her prayer doesn't actually necessarily cause him to stay alive or cause him to die. It's usually that their prayer keeps him alive, right? Even though, my friends, what's important about that is, even though the text seems to be critiquing them for keeping him alive, she is able to see his pain, and they are unable to see his pain. All they can see is
their own need.
Their own need. I need my Rebbe to stay with me. I need my teacher here. And you know what's interesting about that is later on in the text, right? What do we call him? What do we call him? Yeah, I wrote a code. We call him the Holy Ark. I don't even see him as a person, right? I see him as the bearer of Torah, that which encapsulates the Torah for me, but I don't actually see his humanity. She's able to see that, but I think it's important because he's saying that, that it doesn't seem to be that the way in which she affects that change is through prayer. Maybe Mo is saying, fine, prayer is about her own process, not necessarily about how it affects God. I think that's your response to that, but I think it's a very important point. Whereas for the rabbis, their prayer actually is keeping him alive, right? Which is really, really fascinating. Effect. Yes, Rick, right?
Rick, good. It would seem to me that she's in a particularly advantageous position to understand his pain, given that she's her handmaid.
Good.
These other people are perhaps know him well, they study with him, but he probably doesn't advertise all of his aches and pains or whatever that's going on. So I don't necessarily think that this is due to her superior spiritual abilities, although she might have them. It's just that she's in a particular position.
Effect, good, right, absolutely right. Of course she knows his pain because she's actually the one helping him to the bathroom. Okay, good, effect, very, very nice point. Yes, I don't know your name.
Jared. So I like to connect to modern times, and I see her action of throwing the glass is based on her disagreement with what's going on down below.
Good.
If you look at actual, very common modern ethics training, if there's something going on you don't like in a room, you're actually trained to knock a water vase down off the table so that everybody understands that you disagree.
Great, I think that's a very, very nice point. I absolutely think that's right. She is showing her protest here by throwing down this jug. And I think it's actually really fascinating, my friend, because when you're talking about ethics, and you're talking about, right, this, I heard someone say in Chavruta, this story is classically brought when you're talking about medical ethics, actually. This is the story when you're talking about euthanasia and Judaism, you bring this story, right? And it's actually a really fascinating thing to see that this is the example, and she becomes the standard of an indirect action, right? But that action is actually quite significant, right? So I do agree with you that she is taking action here and perhaps showing her disagreement. I wonder, does she know that means that Rebbe is going to pass away, or whether it's simply, right, what Jerry's saying is, which is just an act of protest. Not that she knows what's going to happen next year. Yes. Can you just tell me your name?
Dvorah. I wonder how the rabbis know what she said, right? Because she's talking by herself on a roof, right? And there's two options. It's either she told them, or maybe they overheard, or maybe they got a vision from an angel or something. But they strike me as very different versions of the story. Because if she told them, then she's asserting herself in the halachic process. She's saying, I know you're going to write this down, and it's going to have halachic implications, and I want you to know what I did. If they found out some other way and wrote her in, then she didn't have the intention. She didn't have the intention to be visible, but they made her visible anyway.
Good, and then why? Why do you think they did that? That's the million-dollar question, I think, right? I think when you, in Talmudic stories, the question of how did they know that this happened, right, is, I would say, well, actually, I'm writing a story, right? I'm telling a story here, which means I'm consciously choosing the characters, and I'm consciously choosing the sentences that they say. So I think it's a very important point for her making, right? That they write her into this. I didn't have to tell the story with the handmaiden, right? I could have just said it was another student. I could have said it was his wife. I could have said, why do I choose the handmaiden? And why do I choose a woman to tell this story about? I think it's really, really interesting. And what do I put into her mouth here? I actually do think it's quite important because I think that perhaps it's not important that it's a woman or that she's in some sort of that she has some sort of special sight. She just has practical sight because she's actually his handmaiden. But I actually think it's very significant to see here that the rabbis, when they tell this story and write this story, are setting her up, right, as a foil against, right, again, it's not the right word, but versus maybe, right, the rabbis of the time, right? And they're having her see his pain, even if it means practically she saw his pain. But they're having her chazai, they're having her see in a way that they cannot see, and they're having her see him as a human being, his physical pain, in a way that they cannot see. And I wonder at this, if this is a moment of self-critique, right? That when sometimes we look at our teachers, we look at our rabbis, and we see them only as as Aaron Kodesh, right? Only as the bearers of Torah, and I don't actually see them as human beings, right? And what does that mean in terms of my own mercy that I have for them? Or how do I act towards them? So I think it's a very, very fascinating and important question.
But I have a slightly different take on that.
Good.
If the jar is broken, they realize that they stopped praying when it happened and that's when he died, they could easily have asked her, why, how did the jar break? Do you know what happened?
Right.
And without having the intent of being written into this halachic document, that she could have told them that she broke the jar so that
Right, absolutely.
she necessarily had to have that intent.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact. Yeah, Lizzie.
So I have some comments about like why is it a woman and why is it a handmaiden?
Good.
So I'm not exactly sure what like the exact language is in Shmuel Aleph, but like I know that Chana, while she's praying, she calls herself a handmaiden. So I thought that was interesting. But I don't know if it's the same language. And then also the story really reminded me kind of like oppositely of like after the whole like Lo Shamayim thing. It was like I think it was Rabbi Eliezer's wife who was the sister of Rabba and Gamliel. And yeah, Sholom. And she was like trying to stop her husband from saying tapu because that would mean her brother would die. So I thought it was like very similar of like a woman trying to
Good.
acting in order to stop or to start in order to keep someone alive.
Right. Good. Absolutely right. It's exactly in a way it's the opposite story. Right. Prayer will kill in that case, and so I want to stop the prayer from happening. And this is prayer will keep them alive, and I want to stop that prayer from happening. Right. It's true. It's a very interesting parallel. Very, very nice. Okay. So I really want to take I want to make sure we get to the other two women as well, and then we'll talk more at the end. I just want to together with you think about so on the one hand of this story, and this is sort of what I want to show repeatedly is that it's complicated. When you ask the question of are women present or are they absent? In this case, I would say both, right? On the one hand, we're telling you a story about a woman. And by the way, Rebbe's handmaiden makes an appearance throughout the Talmud, fascinatingly. Many times, they go to talk to her. Most of the time, it's because they don't know certain words in the Mishnah and what they mean. Because they don't know. What is that? And sometimes it's household items, sometimes it's food items, but they don't actually know what does this word mean, and they go to Rebbe's handmaiden because presumably she grew up in Rebbe's house and could speak this language. So that in and of itself is fascinating. So on the one hand, we have a woman character. She's brought into the story, and that makes her present. On the other hand, she is she's a servant. She's absent in that she's not part of the community. She's other to the community. She's also nameless, right? We don't know her name, which I think is interesting and important to notice here, right? On the other hand, right, back to the present point, she can see something that the men cannot see, right? Which maybe makes her present or absent, depends how you understand what that means, right? But that's interesting to notice that, and I would like to say that the rabbis use her here as a moment of self-critique, right? What happens when we are unable to see our teachers as human beings, and the detriment that can cause when we only see them as Aron HaKodesh and not as. But there's also a moment here of, right, again, her absence, right, in that she is between heaven and earth. She's almost nowhere, right? She's not grounded in their community. Okay, good. So we're gonna keep that for 1 minute. Now we're gonna move on, my friends, to source number 2 on your pages. Very famous text. Once again, we meet a woman who is nameless. Okay, I think it's very interesting to notice that we are encountering women who don't have names, but they're connected to important men. Okay, everybody with me? Source number 2. Okay, Rabbi Akiva Ra'ayad ben Kalba Sabuah. Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Kalba Sabu. Okay, which by the way, appears elsewhere in the Talmud as an incredibly wealthy man. In that he with 2 of his other wealthy friends kept the city of Jerusalem in grain, wood, and oil during the siege on Jerusalem. Okay, so that's just interesting to notice that a very, very wealthy man. Okay, his daughter saw that Rabbi Akiva was modest and noble. Okay, she goes over to him and says, "Amrale, I mekadshana lach." If I were to betroth to you, Azal Rav, would you go to the academy? Would you go learn Torah? Amar la, he says to her, yep. I love that moment. One word, okay? One word that we've seen so far. I love that. Like, what else do you say when the richest girl in town walks up to you, proposes, right? And says, will you go get a PhD? There's only one, yes, I know. Right? There's nothing else to say. It's so amazing. Now, this language, by the way, is really fascinating to me because it's right? Men in the room don't say this, right? But how do we normally betroth a woman, right? Harayat mikudeshet li. She here, I think it's very interesting. The inverse of the language here is quite fascinating, right? If I were to be betrothed, it doesn't work halachically, right? If I were to be betrothed to you, right? It's sort of like it's an inverse kiddushin that's happening here, right? If I were to be betrothed to you, and his response is yes, okay, I accept, right? Again, the same language of she becomes betrothed to him, not that he was mekadesh her, that he betrothed her, but she becomes betrothed to him, right? But Sina in private and b'shadarte, she sends him away. Shama avuha, right? Her father hears about it and throws her out of the house. You can imagine, my friends, the shidduch prospects for this girl. Okay, when your father is kalba savua, they are lining up around the block. And who does she choose to betroth herself to? Shepherd. That's right. Not the shepherd, my father's shepherd. Okay? Right? And I think it's quite fascinating to notice that, right? And lo and behold, he goes away to study, right? And her father disowns her and swears that, right, makes an oath that she will not benefit from him. And that's very, very severe, by the way. Any benefit from his estate means literally you can't even walk across the property. When you forbid someone from your estate, there is nothing that she can do, right, on his property anyway, okay? He goes and sits for 12 years in the Beit Midrash. So before we even get to the whole rest of Akiva's glory, which we're about to see in a second, I just want to talk about this woman for a minute. At this point in the story, who is this woman?
Princess.
Oh, that's great. Did everybody hear that? Hillary. He said Hillary. Okay, fantastic. Okay, good. So, okay, we'll keep that over there. But it's an interesting idea, right? So tell me about her. I want to hear who she is. Yeah.
A lot of times, like, because she's nameless in the story, people, I guess, call Rabbi Akiva's wife Rachel.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's similar because Akiva comes from Yaakov, and there's this whole idea of the fact that, like, marrying your father's shepherd and, like, the waiting time. So it's interesting. So just thinking about, like, the similarities between this character and Rachel.
Yeah, okay, good. So, by the way, just so we know why we call her Rachel, it's not just because of the similarity between Yaakov and Rachel, actually, but actually there is a text, 12th century Midrash, which names her that explicitly, just so you know. But also because the last line, and I think unfortunately I did not make it into the source sheet, right? I did not. But the last line here is Rachela B'tar Rachela Azla. That a U follows a U. That's actually that's sort of like the prologue? No. What's the opposite? Epilogue. Thank you. The epilogue of the story is actually that sentence, and that's why presumably her name becomes Rachel. But yes, absolutely, that's happening here. That there is an Akiva, Yaakov, Rachel thing happening, right? And in fact, my friends, the name Akiva in Aramaic is actually Yaakov, right? The same letters, right? Akiva, Yaakov, they're actually the same letters in Aramaic. Akiva is the Aramaic version of Yaakov. It's even stronger, right? What you're saying, right? Just to strengthen that connection. Absolutely happening here. Good, okay, good. So, Yaffa, yeah, no, go ahead.
So is she someone who wants to study the Torah, and she can't? So she will give up everything, presumably, knowing that her real love is to study, and she'll make it for him, so it'll be for her.
Yeah, Yaffa. I love that read of this story, right? She wants to go get a PhD. Right? That's actually what's happening here in this story, right? And she can't, right? For whatever reason, she can't. So the next best thing is, I'm going to choose something. Now, what's interesting about that to me is, but why didn't she just pick a known Torah scholar? Why does she have to pick Akiva and turn him into the person that she presumably, if we're reading that way, wants to be, right? I think it's a very, very interesting question. Eliana.
Well, I think she notices two very important characteristics.
Good, Yaffa.
Which are the modesty and humility that he has, which seem to be the opposite or stand apart from the wealth and the life that she's been living.
Good.
So in that way,
Good.
maybe
Excellent.
there's a way of learning Torah with a modesty or with a humility that others don't appreciate.
Yeah, beautiful. Very, very important point, right? That it's not just that she picks some random person, right? She sees in him these character traits, although I think that they're so fascinating because they're usually what we would have expected, how we would expect to describe a woman. At least the modest, right? To me, right? This modesty, I would have expected to be the exact opposite. The whole first piece here, if you would have changed the male-female pronouns, would be much more of a classic story. Oh, I came upon this woman and she was the maid, right? And I saw she was very modest and I fell in love with her and I betrothed, right? But that's a classic sort of story and it's actually the exact opposite sort of fairy tale, right? Which is really interesting and important to notice here that, right, she notices these things that perhaps are values that were missing in her own life, right? Which we can see by her father being so furious at her choice of partner that he owns her completely, right? Very, very nice. Yaffa. Very good boy. Yeah, right.
I have two weird thoughts. Well,
good.
The first one is, do we have any idea how old she is?
No.
Because this time I was looking at it thinking, what if she was like really young and she was looking out for a husband for herself to be in a different world, and so waiting this long would not be such a disaster.
Right. Good.
And the other weird thought was a parallel to the story of Yochanan and Reish Lakish, in that she saw somebody who would be a brilliant Torah scholar who had nothing to do with Torah scholarship, but she was not in a position to do the teaching herself, so she had to send him away, but she had some ability to sensing.
Right, good. I think that's a very, very nice point. And that's usually classically how the story is understood, right? That she had some sight. Again, back to this issue of seeing something that others could not see, right? We see that with the first story that we saw, and here again, she had some sort of insight, some vision, something about how he walked in the world, right, versus the other shepherds, or right, that she saw a quality in him, and she said, "This person has this potential, and I am going to sacrifice everything." Right, in order to enable him, that's why I call this to her, this supporter, right? In order to enable him to, but there is, I think, a very interesting, important point here, which is where's her journey? Right? Where's her journey in all of this? And right, and we don't see it. I think that's where the absence comes in, right? We don't get to see. Perhaps she does get a tremendous pleasure and enjoyment from the fact that he becomes this great Torah scholar because she's able to see that. But her own journey here is missing, and I would go further than to say missing, right? As we go on, we're going to see a little more what happens to her. Okay, yes. Yes, go ahead.
I see a connection to the previous story in that she sees him as being humble and modest, and perhaps the Torah scholars in her that she is familiar with are like the ones in the previous story who don't relate to the humanity of Rabbi, and she wants someone who will do that.
Nice, right, excellent, very, very nice. Yes.
It seems to me you're the daughter of the richest guy in town.
Yeah.
I mean, all the suitors are coming and they're self-aggrandizing and they're tooting their own horns and they are impressing you, but the dad, you know, and they want this shit up for whatever reasons they want this shit up. And so, you know, so her looking to someone other than, you know, that category of person, I totally understand. There's something about the enabling thing that I'm finding not quite so pure. like on the one hand, yes, okay, I'm going to enable this guy to go. Someone mentioned maybe she's very young and she doesn't want anything to do with the marriage, really. So go.
Great.
You know,
take another 12 years. Go ahead.
I'll pay for your ticket to go to, you know, wherever. I mean, but there's also another part of it that if you have a sponsor, you know, I mean, in this case, but you have a sponsor who's letting you do this, then the way you begin to look at things may be influenced by the fact that your journey was only able to take place because of this. And so, maybe that's.
I hear you saying it changes his Torah.
Yeah.
Right? Which is so great, because actually, okay, so we must go on, let's just keep going for one more minute if we can, okay? So he goes and spends 12 years at the academy. When he comes home, he brings with him 12,000 disciples. He hears an old man saying to her how long he would lead the life of a living widow. She says if he would listen to me, he would take another 12 years back to that idea. Maybe she wants him out of the house. Like, I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. I don't actually, by the way, it's interesting, I never wanted to be married. Right? It's an interesting question in this. I wonder about that here, right? Go for another 12 years. Now, of course, it's very possible that she's saying this sarcastically, defensively, right? He hears it and says, great, see ya. I want, just please walk in the house, give her a hug, say her this part killed me in the story. About face, walks out. And we never see them talk immediately. So far, the relationship between them has been, will you marry me and go learn? And he has said, yes. Yes. We've literally heard him say yes so far in this story, okay? Which is fascinating in terms of his action versus her action, right? Is that with her consent I'm acting, and he leaves again and spends another 12 years at the yeshiva. When he comes back, this time he comes to town with 24,000 disciples. And this time the whole town hears about it. The first time he comes back with only 12,000, nobody knows. Nobody in town knows. 24,000, suddenly everybody knows about it. And her friends say to her, your husband's coming, put on a little lipstick. Right? Borrow some respectable clothes and put them on, right? And she says, respectable clothes? You don't understand our relationship at all, right? And listen to this, my friend, very heartbreaking. Yodea tzadik nefesh behem tov, right? A righteous man knows the life of his beast. As Lizzie said to us, we're referring back to, again, this idea of her being Rachel and him being Yaakov, right? And Akiva is the shepherd, she is his. Rachel, his sheep, right? No, you don't understand our relationship at all, she says to them. He knows who I am and I know who he is, okay? Our relationship has nothing to do necessarily with the physical, which is really quite fascinating here. But there's also, I think, a moment of pain, right? When we talk about absence of the woman here, right? She doesn't even see herself as a person here, right? She describes herself as Behemto. It's very painful, right? I did make this huge sacrifice for you, and what happens, I wonder, when I think there's a moment here of rabbinic fear, right? What happens when I do leave my wife for 24 years? How does she see herself? What's her own inner life like? How does, right? And there's a moment of pain here, right? Perhaps she sees herself. She doesn't think, right? Right? When she comes, listen to this, my friend. When she comes in front of him, she falls on her face, right? And she wants to kiss his feet. His students are about to push her aside, right? And he says, oh, Shavkuha, leave her alone. Shaliva shalachem shalah. Right? Shaliva shalachem shalah. Right? Mine and yours are hers. Everything about us, that's the point, right? Everything about us is because of this woman, right? It is the ultimate romantic moment, my friends, right? The violins are streaming and he's saying, oh my gosh, Shaliva shalah. No. Yeah, I think no. What? That's the ultimate romantic moment? No. Right? It's a moment of gratitude on the part of Akiva, right? But it doesn't necessarily, right? And I think it's very interesting, right? What are we saying here about the relationship between these two people, right? He gets it only when his students come to push her aside, right? It's not that he says, don't fall down on your face, because it's actually that he says to his, it's actually a moment, I don't know if it's the ultimate moment of relationship between the couple, or it's the ultimate moment of him with his students. Actually, teaching them, wait, you didn't understand something. And I want to say, not only did you not understand something, you know who else didn't understand something? Me. That's right. I didn't really get it either until this moment. The light bulb goes on, oh my goodness. And I think it's quite fascinating here because there's a deep message of, when I have actually left my wife for 24 years, the lesson that my students learn is, it's okay. It's okay. And what else? It's okay and?
Something you want to do.
You want to do. But when a poor old woman comes to talk to your teacher, how do I relate to her? Not with a lot of respect. Right? In fact, my friends, these 24,000 students, right? Akiva's famous 24,000 students are severely critiqued. Because they lo nahagu kavod ze lazeh. They didn't treat each other with respect. I think it's the same 24,000 students we're talking about here. Okay? Elsewhere in the Talmud, we're told that these 24,000 students died, right? Because they did not treat each other with respect. And I think that this text is saying, when I allow myself, right, to ignore my wife for 24 years, right, actually, essentially what's happening is my students don't learn basic kavod. So that an old woman who's poor and falls down at my rabbi's feet, I shouldn't be saying, oh, you want to talk to my rabbi? Come sit with us, come be with us. But no, the response is, get away from our rabbi, get away, you old poor beggar woman, right? And he, I think at this moment, this is when Akiva really deeply understands it. Interestingly, the result of this story is that then her father comes and annuls the vow and gives him half of his wealth and everything turns out great, right? It's the ultimate, there's a moment here of the ultimate rabbinic fantasy, right? In that he gets to learn all this Torah, he amasses all these students, and he gets wealthy at the end of the day, and he has children, by the way. Right? So it's like everything works out perfectly, except for this story, I think, has these moments of pain, right? These moments where his students don't understand how to treat other people. She has lost her ability to see herself, right? Her own vision, right? Even though she has enabled him, right? Also we're seeing that the text severely critiques him. So I think it's fascinating. Part of what I love about the story is that, again, there is serious presence on the part of this woman. This is the foundation story about Rabbi Akiva, my friend. Rabbi Akiva, who is the founder of our Midrashic school, right? The rabbis follow the Midrashic school of Akiva, and he is one of the most important rabbis of our time, and his foundational story is that who plucked him out of shepherdhood? A woman, right? A nameless, right, very wealthy woman plucked him out of, right, oblivion and created Akiva. But the question is always, right, at what cost? Right, so it's a very interesting, and the rabbis, by using her as the character and telling her story, right, they're telling her story here, we don't really hear him at all until the end of the story. By telling her story, or at least how they imagine her story, are saying, yes, we need Rabbi Akiva's, but we have to also recognize that there is a cost. When I leave my wife for 24 years, there is a cost to her identity, right? And maybe even to what my students learn. So on the one hand, there's an intense gratitude, but on the other hand, right, I don't know if I've taught them how to be mensches, right? Okay, hands, okay, because we're gonna take 3 more hands, then we're gonna do Burya, and we're gonna end. Okay, Eliana, go ahead.
So, remind me, it's been a long time since I've done my own wedding, but Rabbi Akiva is also one known to like really put forth back in their Chachma, right?
Yes, oh yes, so, he's a lover.
Fascinatingly, we juxtapose this story with the concept of kavod and the death of the students and where Rabba falls in. It's almost as if it took a woman to teach all of the rabbis about the concept of treating each other in a civil way, woman or not.
Yes.
So, you know, that's just like a...
I agree.
Fascinating moment. And yet she's still not named.
Yeah, still not named. Right, 100% right. All that's right. I 100% agree with you that we are purposely choosing a character. I just want to add to what you're saying one more thing, which is that 24,000 students, I amassed 24,000 students in how long? 24 years. What is my relationship like with my students when I have 24,000 students? What's it like?
Very personal.
Not very personal, right? I'm extremely charismatic. I have a magnetic presence, but I certainly don't have a personal relationship. After Akiva's students die, he has only 5 students, right? And that is important, right? That he goes from having 24,000 students to 5, right? And the Talmud talks about that. In my youth, I sowed all these great seeds, but also in my old age, I also have to continue planting, right? And there's an idea there of, I think Akiva learns this lesson of personal, that moment, exactly. Shali v'shalachem shalahi is actually the moment of, oh my goodness, I thought this was it. Actually, it's about personal relationships. And that's right, I think that's true. Part of it is that the Talmud is using this woman, this female character, to teach me that. But again, back to your original point, which is the fact that I have to use a woman to teach me that means that somehow she's able to teach me something that I'm using her character to teach me something that's external, perhaps, to the rabbinic discourse, right? Or at least not naturally part of a midrash, right? Right. Okay, good. Yeah?
Well, I was just going to say, the 2 women in the different stories, they bring in the humanity.
Good.
And so,
good.
You know, only about the intellectual or about halakhic, pieces, then, and halakha is also about humanity, we kind of need women to be part of that discourse.
Right.
Great.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Effect. Okay, wait.
No, it's fine.
You sure? Okay. So actually, my friend, I'm so sorry. I know we want to keep talking, but I have to end because we're running out of time. And we we cannot leave without talking about Bruria because it would just be totally wrong to talk about women without talking about Bruria. It's sort of not nice to her. So out of respect to her, we must continue. Okay, so I actually am going to skip source number 3, even though it's great and talk about bringing in the humanity. And we're actually going to skip straight to source number 4. And we'll close with this and, no, that's not true, I just lied to you. We won't close with this. There's one more piece we have to do, and it's not Bruria, it's someone from our time. Okay, so source number 4 on your pages, my friends, comes from Tractate Eruvin. And it's actually this piece here of Eruvin is a whole treatise on how we treat our students, how you learn Torah. And in this conversation we're told, Bruria once came upon a student who was learning Torah quietly. In other words, whispering their learning. Batshabe, in English here, right, she rebukes him. I think it could be stronger probably, right? She kicks him, she rebukes him and says, right, is it not written, ordered in all things and preserved? If it is ordered in your 248 limbs, it will be preserved. Otherwise, it will not be preserved. This is going on to this idea the rabbis have that Ramach Eivarim, there are 248 limbs in the body, and they are vis-a-vis the mitzvot aseh, the positive commandments. And she says to him, when you learn Torah, you must place the Torah where? Yeah, in your mouth and in your body. Use your body in order to learn Torah. But I think it's so fascinating here, my friends, because again, why would they choose a female character to teach this story? I don't know,
there are 248 limbs in a male body, according to Chazal. So she's sort of making I think that's maybe elements in what she's saying. Like you male students who has access to this, like this male activity, like you have to like embody it in your male body.
Right, excellent. Excellent, I absolutely think that's happening, right? You male, you have this, I gotta push my way in, right? I had to fight to be here with you all, right? You have this privilege, right? So we think the issue of privilege is brand new. It's not, right? You have this privilege, that's what she said to him. Use your male privilege, she says to him, and use it, but interestingly here, she says use it in your voice. I think it's so interesting. You have a voice in this community. You have a responsibility to utilize your voice. And I think it's interesting because, Eliana, goes back to what you were saying before about here, I do think she's saying it as a woman, specifically to him, but it also is told in a very simple manner that I tell many stories about what happened to the Midrash, right? Once upon a time she came across this, it's not like what we saw in the first 2 stories where it's like they're completely out of the, they're not in the Midrash, they're not in the prayer community. Here, she comes across a student and she gives him some musar, right? That's a normal phenomenon in Talmudic stories. So here would be an example, I think, where it feels like every other Talmudic story. It just happens to be, and I don't think it just happens to be, but it happens to be Bruria, by the way, and she has a name here. You notice that, my friends? She has a name here. She's not connected with any other man, which, by the way, she is elsewhere in the Talmud, but in this particular story, she's not connected to another man. She is, right, she's not about her relative, she's not nameless, she has a name, she's 100% present, and her message is, you are in this community, you have a voice here, you have an obligation to use that voice. And she does, right, she teaches him a lesson quoting a pasuk, right, she's acting in a purely rabbinic way here, which I think is quite fascinating, very, very important, and I would argue is a moment of full presence, right? This is so we've seen here, right, both where the woman is present and where she is absent. This is a moment where she is completely present. And her message is, use your voice. And I wonder about this. I wonder if the rabbis here are utilizing this character, again for self-critique, but also perhaps to talk about when you have earned your place and you have a voice, actually I treat it, right? And I wonder if there's a charge here to us. I really think that, for me, the way that I read this text is, there's a charge to us. We all have privilege now, thank God, right? How are we using our privilege? How are we using our voice? If you have a voice, you have to use it, right? So I think Bruria's message worked then, and it works now today for us as well. So we've seen really this idea of female presence and absence, right? The humanity, how women are able to see both of these, right? The first two texts teach us about how the women characters are able to see, and also how the rabbis utilize the female characters in order to self-critique. Okay, I'm completely out of time, and in that vein, I just wanted to read together this very incredible piece. I think I don't know if people have seen this or not. It's a blog on the Times of Israel. It's the last source in your pages, and it was written by a Ayelet Wenger, who is I welcome you help me out here. She is a student at Princeton.
I think she's still, yeah.
Yeah, she's still at Princeton. She is a senior. She's a student at Princeton. The one with a relationship with her, and she wrote this incredible piece called "In the Size 12 Men Footprints of My Forefathers." It's really worth looking at and reading, but I just want us to, we're going to close with this because I think it's so fascinating. I pray in man, she says, in false pronouns, in the linguistic space of a foreign gender, in a collective maleness that is grammatically explainable because, well, that's how Hebrew works. Every week in Yikurim Purkan, I beseech God on behalf of this entire holy congregation, them and their wives. I do not want this wife of mine, and even if I did, my holy congregation would forbid her, but still I pray for her. The possibility that I am not a member of this holy congregation, that I am just a wife of, must not be. By the way, this is another moment. I think she's answering, right? The Plaskow piece of, when I say them and their wives, by definition it means that the them is not, right? So it's an interesting question how far we've come from 1990 to, right, 2015, my friends, 35, right, 25 years later. Right? I am your manservant, son of your maidservant. 7 women squeezed together into a tiny college dorm on the eve of Purim. We have run out of festival songs, and now we are singing the slow songs, songs that come back to the canned peaches of synagogue Sudash. Isn't it great, guys? It's an amazing piece. Right? To moments now in summer camp when Clamp's eyes first tried to squeeze a path to him, to sunsets with sisters that remind me of past sunsets, reaching back through the pages of eternal life to a mountain somewhere in a desert when you first heard his voice. I am your maidservant, daughter of your maidservant, one voice corrects. She is right, of course. We are no manservants, of course. We are no sons. The womanly voices continue with the new words, but I cannot follow this better song, this new song. It is not a song of camp peaches or sunsets. Years ago, I discovered my God in man. I do not know if I can find him in another language. I think it's such a powerful piece. It's really worth reading the whole thing. It's beautiful. But I wanted to end with that because I think we're still living this question, I think we're still really living this dilemma of simultaneously we have strong female presence. We are in a time of intense female scholarship, of capacity for women, of capabilities for women. And on the other hand, we still are left with some very serious questions, a lot of work to do. A lot of, as a community, a lot of thinking about important questions regarding gender, regarding women's place in the community, and also liturgy. I think it's a very interesting question. And this pull to simultaneously want to hold on to tradition, my memories, what ties me back into the past, and also saying my authentic voice. I think it's a strong pull. I think we're really hearing it here very authentically from this young woman, and I think it's a very interesting and important question for us to continue. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's a struggle. It's a struggle, and it remains a struggle, even as we are very blessed to continue adding our voices, right? Gloria is charging us, add your voice, you have an obligation. If you can speak, you must speak, and I still maintain this dance and struggle with tradition and with modernity. And with that, I'm going to end. Thank you guys so much.